In-person scientific conferences are back in full swing, and the bumbling biochemist is here to make sure you don't miss a thing. Well, actually, you're going to miss a thing. A lot of things. Because there's just so much going on in a scientific conference between the talks, the posters, the exhibits. There's so much stuff going on. But the very idea of a scientific conference can seem kind of abstract if you've never been to one. But actually submitting an abstract is your first step to actually being able to present your research either as a poster, or if you're lucky and get selected, like I did, then you are going to be able to give a talk about your research, like a short talk. They also have invited speakers. And so I want to help guide you through this whole thing of what to expect in a scientific conference. And so I'm really excited that this summer I'm going to get to present my work at the Global Biochemistry Summit in Lisbon, Portugal. I have never been to Portugal. I've never been to an international conference, and I am just super duper stoked that I was selected. My abstract was selected in order to give a short talk. It's my first in-person conference in a few years, and so I thought that I would, for my sake and for all of our sakes, kind of go over what a scientific conference entails. For training scientists in particular, conferences are an amazing opportunity, both to present your research, to meet new people, get new ideas, hear about some awesome scientists, do networking, make new friends. So lots of really, really important stuff is going on inside of a conference. And as a training scientist, one of the most important things is actually, although there's all these awesome talks and stuff that you're going to get to learn from other people, one of the best things about attending a meeting is when you can actually present your work, especially when you are like a student or a postdoctorate fellow, that sort of thing. It can be hard to get your work seen by others, especially if it's not to the point where you can publish it yet. And so having the opportunity to do either a poster or a short talk at one of these conferences is a way to tell the world about the cool work that you're doing, even if you don't have enough work to have this huge picture, to have this big formal paper. And so one of the great things about conferences is that they're really presenting kind of hot off the bench research. So especially with posters, we'll get more into abstracts later, but for now, they just know they're kind of like a summary of the work, explaining what you're going to talk about. When it comes to submitting an abstract, you basically submit an abstract and then you can check or not check to be considered to give a talk. So these aren't the award talks or the plenary talks, so they're typically shorter. Those award talks or the plenary talks and stuff, those are typically typically around an hour. But for the selected talks from the abstracts, they're typically shorter. Sometimes they have some longer and some shorter. Sometimes they even do like flash talk type things where they're really, really short, but often they're in like the 15-minute range. And so they choose the talks from among the abstracts, and then any that aren't chosen for a talk are usually given a poster unless they're way outside the scope of the meeting or that sort of thing. So with scientific posters, you typically have these big posters and you present your work, and you try to keep the text minimal. With probably too much text on this first poster of mine, but you want to have minimum text, and you let the figures speak for themselves. And then there are poster sessions where you are designated a time at which you're going to stand by your poster. Often what they do is they have a bunch of posters and they have a big poster hall, and you'll be designated, your poster will have a number. And then at various times, different numbers will be like, the presenters will have to be there. So the posters will always be up for people to explore, but you only have to actually go stand by it during your assigned period. So sometimes, depending on how many posters, there might be like evens and odds. Or if it's a bigger conference, there might even be bigger breakups than that. But so this is so that everybody has a chance to look at other people's work, as well as a chance to stand at their own work. Of course, if you are like an odd person that wants to look at an odd poster, then you're kind of out of luck if you're in some cases. But so if you're presenting a poster, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you stay like engaged. So it can get kind of awkward if there's just like people walking by you and you're just like, no one's stopping by you. People are going to the posters next to you. People are going to the posters across. And so it can be really tempting to kind of just pull out your cell phone and kind of just hide in yourself, but don't do that. The best part is when you can have these conversations with people and you never know who's going to come up and strike out a cool conversation, give you ideas about your research directions. Maybe even if you're looking for a postdoc, if you're looking for a job, that sort of thing, you might actually meet people that way that can actually give you ideas. And so what's really great about poster sessions is not just for the presenter, but also for the people viewing these things, is that you're looking at work in progress. So when people are giving a poster, it's typically like not work that it would be kind of like a part of a paper or a paper in progress. So often the results, there's not tidy little ends like this is exactly where like we have this whole story. Instead, it'll be like, so we're at this point, this is what we want to do next, and we're trying to figure out how best to do this. And so it's a great opportunity to kind of brainstorm with people and see what they think would be good to try. Often people will be asking you questions like, well, have you checked this? What about this? Have you considered this? Oh, I wonder if, and these questions are really great, especially when you're at this poster stage, because something scary happens when you actually like publish your paper and then you're presenting like that published work and it's supposed to be this whole final story. And then people have all these questions and it's like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I do that? Why didn't I blah, blah, blah. But at this point, when people are giving you input, when people are giving you questions and stuff, you know that your story is still in progress and you have a chance to actually keep building. And by having all of this great feedback, it's going to help you know how you would like to advance your work. The good thing is that you can talk to the people who are giving the posters. The bad thing is that sometimes people get tied up with like a big crowd of people around them. And if you want to go look at their poster, you kind of have to figure out when the time is when people are going to not be like standing around, or you catch it, you walk by and they're at the tailwind of their little like spiel about what their research is about. So often what you do is you prepare like a few minute overview to walk people through your poster. And so then you can, every time someone new comes up and you say like, oh, would you like me to walk me through my work or whatever. So sometimes people, you might want to, depending on how detailed your research is and like how like niche it is and stuff, you might want to say, oh, are you familiar with blah, blah, blah. And before you like start diving in, or maybe you can skip sections or you can review sections. Various things, various amounts of background, or if the person has a particular interest, then you might say that, and then you can kind of tailor your talk to that particular person. But you want to have a kind of planned like speech ahead of time to walk people through the poster, and then hopefully they'll have questions that can then help dive deeper. And so questions might come during the talk or at the end. But this is just an informal chat. Sometimes what you do is you can actually have like a little flyer printed out version of your abstract, or maybe some like a QR code that they could scan to get a PDF version, or to get your contact information, various things like that. So people can follow up if they have questions as well. So yeah, I would encourage doing some sort of like virtual QR code or something to preserve like paper entries and stuff. Especially because one of the bad things about having the conferences in person is that it's a lot harder on the environment when you're having people fly all over the world and then have all this stuff printed out. So that is the idea with the posters. Typically, how it works is that when you find a conference that you want to go to, such as this conference, you're going to submit an abstract to make sure that your abstract is as good as possible. And so a couple of years ago, I had asked Alexandra Newton, the president of the IUBMB, who was president-elect when I actually met her at a conference, and this whole thing started. I asked her about her tips for writing an abstract. And so I call these Newton's concrete laws for abstract writing. So you want a clear, concise title. And so your title is when you have in the abstract book, you're going to have your title, and then you're going to have like the authors, and then the body of the abstract, which is going to be about a paragraph, and it's going to be basically summarizing things. So what you put in the abstract, you want to use 2 sentences or fewer to introduce the background and significance of your work. So what do people need to know in order to appreciate what you're doing or what you did? And why is it important that you did it? And by the third sentence, you want to say exactly what the point of your study is. If you haven't said it by then people have probably moved on, or they're just really confused, unless they know that they really care about this topic. And then you want to make sure you have a concluding sentence and reference how the work was funded. And so often this will be like a grant number, that sort of thing. And then I added, get excited, because it is exciting. So you want an abstract to be clear and concise. So sometimes you see people stuffing a ton of data into the abstract, but really the abstract should be more of a summary, kind of like what you would see in the abstract for a journal paper, except that here it's more of a work in progress that you're presenting. And often they won't even let you present work unless at least some of it is unpublished. And so because this in a conference, they really want to see like this latest and greatest, like what are you working on right now? What did you work on 2 years ago, unless it's like one of the invited speakers. And so this is what makes scientific conferences really great, is that you're learning about things that are happening like right now. But what makes it not so great is that you have to be at the conference in order to be able to know all of this. So sometimes you can see the conference abstract, the public abstracts, even if you weren't actually at the conference. So the details are going to vary for the various conferences, but I'm just going to show you on this conference that I'm going to, so that you can get the basic idea. But your way to submit your work is by submitting an abstract. So at this point, the abstracts will have a deadline, and then they'll have a deadline for the late breaking abstracts. So typically the late breaking abstracts, it's like if you don't make it by the deadline, you can still have an abstract, but often what happens is that they put all of the late breaking abstracts together and you don't get considered for a talk. So the abstract will have different abstract topics that you can choose from, depending on the different, like how wide the conference is. So this conference is very, very wide. So the topics are very, very wide. So as someone who studies a protein that works with RNA, I had to choose between proteins and DNA and RNA. If you're going to a more targeted conference, these topics might be much more specific. But you choose a topic that you want your research to go into, be considered for. And then your research, like in the exhibit hall, your research is going to be in that section. But sometimes for like the late breaking, you're not going to actually be in that section. They're going to be in the actual, just on like in a separate place in the room. You typically submit your abstract through the website, and there will be a portal, and so then when you submit your abstract, you can ask whether you would like to be considered for a talk. So basically, there are different types of talks when you go to one of these programs. And so there are going to be like plenary lecturers where they have talks from invited speakers. And then there are going to be various sessions where they have talks from that are chosen based on the abstracts. So when you submit your abstracts, there's typically a box, and you press it and say, I would like to be considered for a talk. These are typically shorter talks. So mine's going to be like 15 minutes. Whereas when you have like the plenary lectures, those are going to be much longer. Often conferences are broken up into these symposia, or they have various names for them, but these kind of like sub-conferences. This is what I'm talking about. There's so much going on. And so inside each of these conferences, there's going to be even more sessions, and then there's going to be speakers at each of these sessions. And so there's so much stuff going on, and that when you're going to one of these meetings, you want to look ahead of time. What they're going to do is they'll publish an abstract book. This abstract book is going to have the abstracts that people submitted. When you submit the abstracts all get kind of like published and collated into this abstract book. This book is really great to look back on and look through and have it, especially because when they're often published, you can see what people are presenting, even if you couldn't go to the meeting. But they're also really great. You want to actually look over the abstracts before you actually attend the conference, so you can kind of scout out what things you want to go to when. Nowadays too, the abstract books are going to be digital. They often have apps on your phone if it's a big conference that you can kind of navigate through things, see the schedule, plan out your events on this app itself. When you're going to one of these big conferences, there's going to be tons and tons of stuff going on at the same time. And so you can see that there are multiple different symposia going on at the same time. In addition to having the various speaking sessions, you also have special lectures and you have special sessions, various things, educational workshops, various different topics that you can choose to go to or not. And throughout the whole thing, you're also going to have at various times, there's going to be poster viewing. So they'll have like, often this is done over like a lunch break. And after the afternoon sessions, there's various sessions and ways that they do this, and it's going to depend on your conference. So you're going to have the invited lectures, you're going to have award lectures, various things like this. They also have these like commercial workshops. So basically that's where companies will put on workshops about how to use their products and that sort of thing. So these can actually be really great. And at least pre-COVID and stuff, they often provided free food. I don't know about now. Then in terms of other things, so they have like a visit to exhibitors. So they have basically you can get a lot of swag at one of these conferences. And so typically they have a big exhibit hall. Sometimes this is the same hall as the posters, sometimes they're separate. And basically all of these companies are going to tell you about all their latest products. A lot of times you can get a bunch of free samples, things like mini prep kit type things, various gels, stains, various things that you can get free samples of, and some cool stuff like that. So yeah, that's a cool kind of swag. Conferences can be really expensive, both in terms of you have the registration, you have the travel, the hotel, various things. And so hopefully your lab is in a position that they can pay for it, but they're not always. And sometimes they might be able to pay up to they'll give you like a certain amount, but then you have to foot the bill for the rest. And there are different ways that you can save money when you are going to a conference. And so I want to mention some of these things here. Okay, so when it comes to registration, there is going to be a registration fee. Often you can get a cheaper registration if you apply early. You're going to have a cheaper if you're like a student or a young scientist. They have different ways that these are broken up with different things. And then in all cases, typically, I don't know, I've never seen a conference where they didn't have some sort of way that you can apply to get funding to travel or to have your admission fee waived if you do not have the financial ability to afford to go. In addition to this, there are often going to be travel awards that you can apply for. If you're submitting to present your research, you can then apply to get a travel award to help offset the cost. Sometimes there are, especially nowadays, there are options for like a hybrid where you can actually like stream the talks. It's not quite the same as being there in person, but it's a lot cheaper. And so one of the benefits of virtual conferences during the pandemic was that you could go to a lot more conferences because they were all virtual and it was a lot cheaper. But when you have these in-person conferences, it could be really expensive to do this whole like going some foreign place, potentially foreign, sometimes closer, and then having to pay for lodging. Speaking of which, often they'll have these conferences will be hosted at some sort of like fancy hotel, and they'll have on the website, often they'll have like, they'll direct you to get rooms in the hotel. Often there's going to be rooms nearby, hotels nearby that are a lot cheaper. And they often also have like message boards where you can try to get to share a room with another student or another someone else from the conference. And so those are things to look into. I don't think I ever stayed at the actual hotel where a conference was happening, but often these conferences are happening in like convention centers, if it's a big one or something like that, in an area where there's going to be a lot of other hotels and stuff nearby, with a lot cheaper prices. So definitely something to look into. Hopefully your lab is going to be at least reimbursing you. That sometimes the bad thing is that you have to that they can't book the stuff for you, or they can't pay you in advance. And so you end up having to get reimbursed, which means that you're out a bunch of money while you're waiting for the thing to happen and then to be reimbursed. And so try to go talk to your lab, whoever's like in charge of the payment or whatever, and try to see if you can get it so that they can actually book the things directly or that sort of thing. And so you're not having to go through this reimbursement, which can be a big problem for a lot of people. And so I just wanted to put that out there, that this might be an issue, and this is something that you should definitely bring up and see what the situation is before you find yourself in a bad situation where you can't. And also look into those award opportunities. There's often events before or after or during the conference that you can do if you have the ability to extend your stay a little, or take some time away from all those amazing talks that are going on. So for example, when I went to this ASBMB conference, or this experimental biology conference a few years ago, not only did I meet some really great people, including Julia Obi, who I have kept in touch with and who's doing amazing research now as a graduate student, but we also built a house together, or at least we helped build a house together. So there's often days of service before the conference. And so we have this day of service where we're helping build a house. And so that was a really, really great experience. I also got to meet some really, really outstanding scientists like Drs. Christine Dunham and Namanje Bumpus. Hear talk from one of those featured talks from Brian Drucker about the development of Gleevec. There was some really, really awesome stuff going on in the conference. And often some of the greatest stuff going on in the conference is actually going on in those poster halls, even though they might not be the big splashy works and the big titles. Even if you don't get submitted, don't get accepted to give a talk, there's still some really, really great work happening in the poster session. And one of the great things about the poster session is that you can actually like talk with people. So often how it works is that in those talk sessions, they'll have 4 or 5 speakers in a row, and then like a quick break, and then 4 or 5 more speakers. Sometimes they'll have it so that if they have multiple symposium or whatever going on, like these mini conferences going on in different rooms, and then you have to figure out like in your abstract book, okay, I want to go to this one here and this one here and this one here, but sometimes the times get a little off, and so by the time you get to one of them, it's already over, or you get they're way off schedule, or speakers have switched. So that can be a kind of a pain if you're trying to squeeze in a bunch of meetings. But often they'll have these like sessions with like 4 or 5 different talks, and then a break, and then 4 or 5 different talks. And so each of the speakers will have a set amount of time, and then they typically have a few minutes for questions and answers. Hopefully the moderator does a good job, because sometimes what happens is that there's supposed to be questions, but instead someone just kind of gets up and goes on for 5 minutes about something they've discovered. And there's not really a question anywhere in there. But that's like your only opportunity to ask questions, unless you can like find them after the break, like I did with Dr. Bumpus, which was awesome. But when you're doing a poster session, you can actually just like walk by and actually talk with people and have these discussions and have this back to back. And so be able to actually look closer at the data too, because it can be hard when someone's giving a talk and it's this one slide that flashes for a minute and you're curious, want to know more about it. With a poster session, you can actually go and actually just like look at those actual charts and look at the graphs, look at the structures, various things like that, and talk to the people who actually did the work. So often you'll see like multiple names on a poster. And so there's a lot of people that contribute to any one piece of work typically. And often the presenting person will be bolded. If you see in an abstract book or on a poster, there'll be a list of names and then the presenter will be in bold. Then this is also how you'll see it typically if you put it on your CV. So you can put presenting on your CV in like a presentations section or like a poster session, various things depending on what you have. But so you put the title and you put the authors, and then you'll have yourself will be bolded. And in that case, you would hopefully be the person that had presented it. And so this is a great way to help boost your CV, but it's really just a better opportunity to really develop as a scientist and meet a bunch of people. So actually my first experience when I actually felt that I could be a scientist was when I went to my first scientific conference. So this was my first poster session. This was an undergrad. This was not a big scientific conference. This was in the hall of our science building, but I ended up winning a summer research award that gave me the ability to travel to the ASBMB conference. And so that was my first conference, and I had this really, really amazing experience. And then I went back to an ASBMB conference a few years later, and I actually got to give a talk about the whole bumbling biochemist and my science communication and outreach efforts. But that first poster session where I was actually at the scientific meeting, it was really my first chance to engage with the scientific community. I went to a small liberal arts school, which I absolutely loved, St. Mary's College of California, and it was so great for so many reasons. But it was a small school, and we didn't even have like graduate students in sciences. When I went to this big conference, I really felt that I got to see all of these different levels of scientists, all of these different people, all of this different science that was going on in all of these different areas and techniques I never even heard of. And so it was really amazing. And it gave me this feeling that I could actually be a scientist and that I could fit into the scientific community. And so I feel like that was as an undergrad, and I feel that like every time I go to one of these conferences, I love talking to the undergrad students and engaging with them and really talking about the research with them. Often they'll have like undergraduate research session or poster sessions or even like competitions. And so they'll award prizes for the best posters, the best presentation. And so you can actually, in some cases, volunteer to be a judge. But even if you're not judging, it's really, really important to engage with these young scientists or these training scientists at this early point in this career. It can be so meaningful to them to have someone of a higher status in the scientific community really be engaged and show that, like, communicate with them like they're a scientist, not like they're a little kid, and to actually ask questions, to actually engage with them, get them talking about their work. This is just so valuable on both sides of things. You can learn as the questioner, you can learn, and as the student, it really just is so heartwarming. When you're standing in a big hall and someone actually comes up and wants to talk about your work, it can be really, really great. So every time I go to a conference, I make sure to talk with the undergrads. As I mentioned before, is that having them in person is a lot more expensive. And so it puts a barrier to access for a lot of people, as well as actually having to take the time away from your life to travel to do this. This can be especially a big problem for people with young children. And so sometimes these conferences will have childcare. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'll have it, but you have to pay for it. Sometimes they'll have it and it's free. So it really, really varies. And there's been a lot of effort recently in order to try to increase the access to childcare at these conferences, or reimbursement for childcare costs if you have to do it that way. And so that's definitely something that is there's becoming growing awareness of it, but it's still a big issue, as well as for people who have some sort of dependent that they have to caretaker responsibilities. So there's a bunch of issues with access when it comes to scientific conferences. So it makes me like, it's hard to get like super duper excited about like, yay, conferences are back in person. I'm really excited about, like, I love in-person scientific conferences, and I feel that there's so much in them that you don't get when out of a virtual conference. But I also recognize that there's a lot of benefits to virtual conferences when it comes to actually having access, as well as environmental considerations. So I know a lot of conferences are going like hybrid, where there's going to be the talks are going to be streamed virtually, as well as for like a smaller fee, as well as the in-person conference. And so hopefully this works out. I feel like there's probably a lot you're going to miss out on if you are just doing the streaming, but at least you can hear the talks. I don't know if there's what the right answer is. I just want to put that out there that this is a serious issue. And I just wanted to bring that up there because it's something that like, it just nags at me every time that I have one of these great opportunities, knowing that not everybody has these opportunities. And so I think that I don't have the answers to all of these problems, but what I can do is just try to share the knowledge that I learned through all of these opportunities, and to pay it forward, and to hopefully be in a position in the future, maybe, where I'll be able to be sending students to conferences and that sort of thing. Drop in the bucket, I know, but every little bit helps. And so if you are going to a conference, I'm really, really excited for you. I'm really, really excited for me to go to this conference. But really in the future, I want to make sure that everybody can go to these conferences, like my pie in the sky ideal or whatever. So I don't know. Those are just my thoughts I wanted to put out there. So hopefully this video helps some people if you are thinking about, or you are going to a conference and you've never been to one before and you have no clue what to expect. And so, yeah,